Hey Grace Church, Michael Campbell here, a pastor of Children's Ministries. I just wanted to go over the story that the kids are going to be going through this weekend and how the story applies to them. But as always, how the story applies to us as parents and guardians and how we live them out, and hopefully how we're able to dive a little bit deeper into the story with our kids. So the story this weekend is Jesus being questioned. We could see that Luke chapter 20, Mark chapter 12, Matthew chapter 22, and it's three groups of people trying to go to Jesus and put him in a corner and try to make accusations about him or really try to polarize which position he was in to get him in trouble. So we're going to tackle two of these stories specifically that the kid's story is going to go through. And the first one is, who do we pay our taxes to? So there's a group of Pharisees and a group of Herodians, which are normally enemies, and you're probably very familiar with the Pharisees and the Jewish people and the Sanhedrin. But there's also the Herodians. These are people who followed Herod and followed the Roman leaders of that time. So normally they were very opposed to each other. But they had a saying back then that said, the enemy of my enemies is my friend. So they both had mutual understanding and intention to take Jesus down. So they brought a denarius to Jesus, a coin that was worth about like a day's wage back in that time. And they said, okay, who do we pay these taxes? And that was really important, and I wanted to get to that shortly. But on that coin, it had a picture of Caesar Augustus. And on one of them, it said Augustus' son, and it was a picture of their face. But it wasn't just the name of the leader, like Caesar Augustus. It was actually a title, August one. It was like a divine majesty back that day. So it was a religious leader, if you will, that had transcending authority. So it was basically saying this Roman ruler, or Caesar Augustus, or Tiberius in this instance, had a divine authority. So the Pharisees and Jewish people of that day said, if we pay this, that means we are submitting to this Augustus who has this divine authority, but we're not going to do that, which was understandable. And then from the other side, if you didn't pay the taxes, then the whole Roman culture was going to attack Jesus. So they cornered him and they said, who do we pay? And back in that day, it's very much like our money. It had the picture of Caesar Augustus. So Jesus saw right there, he's like, why are you testing me like this? Like, what's the problem? He knew exactly what they were getting at. So he says, whose picture is on it? And they're like, Caesar Augustus. He's like, so you pay them. So if it had their picture on it, it belonged to them. So if you had a denarius, you would pay taxes to whom it deserves going to. So it blew their minds because he answered both questions. He says, if it's theirs, you pay them. But what is God's, you also pay to God. And he was essentially saying, the way that you devote your taxes and money should go to the governing authorities who oversee you. However, for those who are in Christ, we have a higher authority in which we need to not only submit money to, but sacrifice our lives to. That's what we as Christians are devoted to. So then the Pharisees and Herodians go running off. And then there's another conversation that happens with, honestly, a well-intentioned scribe saying, what's the greatest commandment? Everything you're saying, I kind of get, but what do you mean? And like, what's the first commandment? And this isn't linear, what's the first, it's what's the most important commandment. And Jesus gets right down to it. In Jewish culture, there was something in Deuteronomy 6 called the Shema. And that's what all Jewish people would recite because it really is like a very primary foundational commandment. And it's, hear, O Israel, your God is one. And then you should love the Lord with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength. Now, Jesus says that, but he also adds one word. He says, with all of your soul, with all of your heart, with all of your mind, and with all of your strength. He was saying, at your very essence, you need to obey and love the Lord. Because they didn't really have an understanding how your mind worked and how to differentiate between your brain and your mind and your heart. So a lot of times they would use the Hebrew word lev for heart, which means the very core of your being. So in your heart, you would think, you would feel sorrow and sadness, and you would find joy from your heart. So when he says, love the Lord with all of your heart and mind and soul and strength. It means from your very core, everything that motivates you, not in weakness, but in strength, should be motivated to honoring the Lord more than anything else. Whether that's Caesar, United States, wherever you are, submit yourself to God first. And next is love your neighbor as yourself, which is very hard to do in our culture because we like to have our opinions and our convictions as the most important thing. But Jesus is saying you need to care about God first, but your neighbor, treat like yourself. The same care and compassion that you have for yourself, you should also have for others. And it's something that I think we should practice. And then as leaders in our homes, we should teach this to our children as well. So that's the story in simplicity, but here are 3 questions that you can ask your children to, again, hopefully dive deeper into the study and just start a dialogue back and forth. So the first question is, how do we give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what belongs to God? The second question is, has anyone else ever tried to get you in trouble? How did you respond? And last question or statement, if you were to ask Jesus one question, what would you ask? Love to hear the answers to that, but hopefully this explains the story a little bit as parents and guardians to walk along and be the primary discipleship makers of our homes. But until next week, God bless and take care.